Sri Brhad Bhagavatamrita, Part 2, Chapter 5, Text 136. Narada is relating Krishna's Brajalila. In summary, I offer my homage to his all attractively worshipping Govardhan Hill. The grammar is awkward. His holding up the great hill with his left hand, his satisfying the cowherds, consoling Indra, and accepting coronation as Govinda, the Lord of the cows. Commentary. Krishna's intention is always to please his devotees. After he held Govardhan Hill aloft for 7 days, just for their benefit, their satisfaction knew no bounds. 10:25-29 Bhagavatam. All the residents of Vrindavan were overwhelmed with ecstatic love, and they came forward and greeted Sri Krishna according to their individual relationships with him, some embracing him, others bowing down to him, and so forth. The cowherd women presented water mixed with yogurt and unbroken barley corns as a token of honor, and they showered auspicious benedictions upon him. Paragraph. Krishna's miraculous feat of lifting Govardhan Hill left the Brajabasis confused about who Krishna really was. But Nanda Maharaj was able to dispel their bewilderment and give them great satisfaction by repeating what Gargamuni had said at Krishna's name-giving ceremony about Krishna's identity. Iti Nandavacha Shrutva. Having heard Nanda Maharaj relate the statements of Gargamuni, the residents of Vrindavan became enlivened. Their perplexity was gone, and they worshipped Nanda and Lord Krishna with great respect. That's chapter 26. As we hear from Sri Parashara Rishi in the Vishnu Purana, 5:13, 10-12, after Krishna lifted Govardhan, he also satisfied the Brajavasis with encouraging words. Quote, "My dear cowherds, if you are not embarrassed to be related to me, and if I deserve praise, then why get perplexed? If you have affection for me, and I'm worthy of your praise, then just think of me as your dear relative. I am no god or Gandharva or Yaksha or Danava, but am simply your family member. You should not think otherwise." End of purport. 137. I am unable to properly describe his super excellent pastimes of showing the abode of Vaikuntha to the residents of Braja and rescuing Nanda Maharaj from Varuna's realm. And how can I ever express in words the sweet way he showed himself to be the Supreme Godhead? Commentary. Krishna proved himself God in one way when he revealed Vaikuntha to the Brajabasis, and another way when he commanded the powerful demigod Varuna to release his father. But Krishna displayed his supremacy in the greatest way when he conducted the all-attractive pastimes of charming the gopis with his flute song and enjoying with them in the rasa dance. This will be discussed later on under the topic of Ashesha Mahatva Madhuri. the sweetness of all of Krishna's excellent qualities. 138. What can I say about these activities of the Lord in Braja? One who carefully thinks about them will conclude they are supreme in all respects. As soon as words describing those pastimes enter the ears, a flood of pure love spontaneously arises in the heart, which is the purpose of his writing this book. Commentary. This verse and the next summarize the topic of Vilasa Lakshmi, the splendor of Krishna's pastimes. Anyone who gives thoughtful attention to the pastimes of Braja will conclude that they are more wonderful than the deeds in all the other incarnations of the Supreme Lord. Even the mere words that narrate those Braja pastimes, beginning with the deliverance of Putana, have a magical power to awaken prema in the heart. Prema begins to awaken when those narrations simply enter one's ears. What to speak of what happens when a thoughtful devotee contemplates them with attention? Without doubting, we should accept that such an effort is possible by the innate potency of the words themselves, prakritya. Certain combinations of words have a natural power to evoke spiritual emotions, just as fire has its natural, inalienable potencies of heat and light. Very beautiful. 139. Very fortunate is one who uses logical arguments to make known the supreme glories of Krishna's pastimes. And to one who becomes full of prema simply by hearing a few words about those pastimes, I offer my humble obeisances. Commentary. It is wonderful when pure love of God is inspired by thoughtful analysis of the meaning of Krishna's pastimes. Much more wonderful, however, is the spontaneous response of pure devotees who are overcome by a flood of prema as soon as they hear the bare syllables of those pastimes. Such devotees need only hear the name, Putana, or a few words from Srimad Bhagavatam for a sequence of ecstatic memories to arise in their hearts. Narada considers those devotees his worshipable superiors, for they have the priceless treasure of natural responsiveness to Krishna Katha. And we have chapters more to go. This is Rasa Tattva. 140. How can my tongue dare try to touch the greatness of Krishna's dearmost possession? What's that? Flute. Which stands out from all else, which befits only him, and which always rests playfully in his lotus hands. Commentary. The sound of Krishna's flute attracted the young gopis to join Krishna in the rasa dance, and after the rasa dance, that sound lingered in their memory. In Srimad Bhagavatam, chapter 35, Canto 10, the gopis' remembrance of that flute song is captured in 11 pairs of verses, of which this pair is the first. So that's how chapter 35, the structure is one verse, and at the end one verse, and all the others are pairs. The gopis said, this is 2 and 3, when Mukunda vibrates the flute he has placed to his lips, stopping its holes with his tender fingers, he rests his left cheek on his left arm and makes his eyebrows dance. At that time, the demigoddesses traveling in the sky with their husbands, the siddhas, become amazed. As those ladies listen, they are embarrassed to find their minds yielding to the pursuit of lusty desires, and in their distress, they are unaware that the belts of their garments are loosening. This is the gopis. Paragraph. Glorifying Krishna's flute, Srila Sanatana Goswami here begins a 17-verse discussion of the next topic, Ashesha Mahatva Madhuri, the sweetness of all of Krishna's excellent opulences. Text 140 through 149 specifically glorify Krishna's flute. Everything about Krishna's flute is exceptional. Since there is no other object like it in the entire world, there is nothing to compare it to. One can understand the greatness of that flute only by studying the amazing effects its sound produces. No one but Krishna could own such a flute, and indeed Krishna never lets it out of his hands, semicolon. Rather, he takes every opportunity to allow the flute to drink the nectar of his lips. 141. Still, by the power of the Lord's mercy, I will say something about it as far as I am able. Please listen carefully. I think we will. The page stuck together. Okay. 142. The words of the Upanishads and the other Vedic texts come forth from the Lord's own divine mouth, but simply by contact with his bimba red lips, that wooden object, the all-enchanting little bamboo flute, has created a sound more nectarian than the words of the Vedas and any other form of speech. Commentary. Narada has great admiration for Krishna's flute, and so he calls it by the affectionate diminutive name Vangshika, little bamboo flute. At the same time, however, he cannot help but feel jealous of the flute's intimate relationship with Krishna, which someone like himself can never have, semicolon. Therefore, he also uses the somewhat derogatory term Dharavi, wooden object, explaining the poetry. 143. Hearing that sound of the flute, all the demigods and perfected mystics flying in their airplanes were bewildered in divine love, and so were their wives. Indra, Shiva, Brahma, and other demigods were so confused that they could no longer tell fact from illusion. Commentary. Flying over the earthly Vrindavan, the demigods and sages in their vimanas, the subtle vehicles that carry them all over the universe by the power of air, were helplessly attracted by Krishna's flute, and their wives succumbed to the charms of Cupid. In Srimad Bhagavatam 11:21-12, the gopis describe that scene. Quote, see where it's from. Okay, this is chapter 35 again, 14, 15. No, it doesn't. That's later. Anyway, Didn't say, oh, it is. 10:21:12. This is the reference. Krishna's beauty and character create a festival for all women. Indeed, when the demigod's wives flying in airplanes with their husbands catch sight of him and hear the resonant flute song, their hearts are shaken by Cupid, and they become so bewildered that the flowers fall out of their hair and their belts loosen. That's chapter 21. Chapter 21. When and sages and their vimanas approached Vrindavan, they first heard the faint sound of Krishna's flute from a distance. Then, and the sound became more audible, even Brahma, Shiva, and Indra were bewildered. So again, we're at chapter 35, 2 verses. The gopis are, Krishna's late, and the gopis go to Mother Jasoda, or at least in their minds, they go to Mother Jasoda, try to pacify her that Krishna's late. Oh, pious Mother Yashoda, your son, who is expert in all the arts of herding cows, has invented many new styles of flute playing. When he takes his flute to his bimba red lips and sends forth harmonious tones and variegated melodies, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods become confused upon hearing the sound. Although they are most learned authorities, they cannot ascertain the essence of that music, and thus they bow down their heads and hearts. The final portion of this purport. The principal demigods and sages were so confused, they couldn't even remember their own identities. They thought, now we can no longer be certain whether the Brahman we know from the Upanishads is actually the absolute truth. Perhaps the sound of this flute is the absolute truth instead, because it seems to be the supreme embodiment of pure ecstasy. Unquote. 144. The scriptures likes talking about Krishna's flute. So does Sanatana Goswami. The great sages, their meditations breaking, felt transformations of ecstasy arising within themselves, and the motions of the moon and other planets, swift and unceasing, which strictly follow the whirling wheel of time, just stopped. Commentary. Not only the faithful theists among the demigods and sages, but also the self-contented impersonalists were enchanted by Krishna's flute. Those impersonalists also experienced the sattvika bhavas of love of God, trembling, horripilation, floods of tears, and so on, which they could never have dreamt of while philosophizing on the bliss of Brahman. And apart from those independent sages, also overcome by prema, were the planets in space, whose motions are normally dictated by the rule of time. The planets felt the sattvika bhava of being stunned, as indicated by the words of the gopis, quote, Brahma, Shiva, Indra, and other chief demigods became confused upon hearing the sound. And that's the previous verse that was quoted. The quote, other chief demigods referred to include Chandrasurya and other rulers of the planets. Srila Shukadeva Goswami also mentions the ecstasy of the planets in his account of the Rasa Leela. Krishna Vikridatam Viksha. The wives of the demigods, observing Krishna's playful activities from their airplanes were entranced and became agitated with lust. Indeed, even the moon and his entourage, the stars, became astonished. That's from chapter 33. 145. The cowherds dedicated to Krishna everything they had, their bodies, families, and property, and their very selves. Those cowherds, indifferent to their own customs and needs, paying no regard to success in this world or the next, had so much respect for Krishna that they even bowed down to their own wives because those wives were dear to him. Commentary. Persons unfamiliar with Krishna were not the only ones bewildered by his charms, semicolon. Even his own close friends and family members were confused. The Gopas of Braja offered everything they had to Krishna, including their children and wives. Thus, in Harivangsha 2:1246, the Gopas, tell Sri Nanda Maharaj, quote, "From today onward, O sinless one, in dangerous situations, broad-eyed Krishna will be the shelter for the cowherds, the cows, and our whole community. He will be the master of us all." Unquote. The phrase, quote, "our whole community," implies that the Gopas meant to include in their statement the young gopis, but were too embarrassed to mention Krishna's relationship with them directly. As the Gopas well know, even their own wives belong to Krishna. Therefore, when the Gopas refer to them as Bharya, the women they were responsible to maintain, they mean for Krishna's enjoyment, not their own. 146. So attracted to Krishna's company were the cowherds' little sons that they acted just like his shadow. If even for a moment they couldn't see him, if he sometimes went away on a whim, they were filled with distress. And when he returned, they would rejoice and rush to touch him. This is discussed directly in the Bhagavatam. Oh, there's the verse below. Chapter 12. This is with the cowherd boys going out before the Brahma Vimohan Leela. Chapter 12. Krishna's cowherd friends were with him constantly. Sometimes, however, Krishna would leave them for a short while to pursue some other interest, like seeing the beautiful sights of Vrindavan. In Bhagavatam 10:12:6, Shukadev Goswami describes how, when Krishna returned from those excursions, his friends would greet him. Quote, "Sometimes Krishna would go to a somewhat distant place to see the beauty of the forest. Then all the other boys would run to meet him, each one saying, 'I shall be the first to run and touch Krishna. I shall touch Krishna first.' In this way, they enjoyed life by repeatedly touching Krishna." 147. Sri Radha and the other supremely fortunate gopis abandoned their husbands, children, and other relatives, their goals for the next life, their religious principles, and even their shyness and the states of ecstatic love they attained, left them always distraught. In such states, they complained pitifully in sweet voices and went through upheavals in which they sometimes lost consciousness, stunned like trees, unable to understand anything. Commentary. Sri Rukmini and the other queens of Dwarka are the consorts of Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead, but The gopis, headed by Srimati Radharani, are the favorite devotees of Parama Bhagavan, the personality of Godhead in its highest feature. Their love for Krishna drives them to extreme states of ecstasy, as they tell in their own words from, again, chapter 35, another pair. As Krishna strolls through Vraja with his lotus petal feet, marking the ground with the distinctive emblem of flag, thunderbolt, lotus, and elephant goad, he relieves the distress of the ground from the cow's hoofs. As he plays his renowned flute, his body moves with the grace of an elephant. Thus, we gopis, who become agitated by Cupid when Krishna playfully glances at us, stand as still as trees, unaware that our hair and garments are becoming loose. Paragraph. Narada speaks of the gopis' complaints as Madhura Katukai, bittersweet, for those who hear them are overwhelmed both by joy and by sorrow. Everyone living in Braja during Krishna's presence was constantly immersed in intense prema, but when he played his flute, the ecstasy of that prema grew unlimitedly, affecting not only those already in love with Krishna, but all beings, living and inert. Just two more verses covers this section. 148. Listen, and I will tell you the most wonderful thing. What's that? Upon hearing Krishna's flute, the many animals born without intelligence abandoned their own natures. The cows did, and the bulls and calves, and the wild beasts of the forest, and the birds living in the trees, and the water birds sporting in distant lakes, and so did the trees and plants, and everything inanimate, and even the inanimate beings like rivers and clouds. That's in this chapter 35. Commentary. One would expect the Brajavasis, expert in the art of rasa, to respond ecstatically to the sound of Krishna's flute. What is amazing is that dull animals and even lesser beings shared that ecstasy. Paragraph. The creatures of Vrindavan mentioned in this verse are listed in order of decreasing intelligence. Along with the cows, bulls, and calves, the village animals also included buffalo, sheep, and goats. Those domestic animals kept company with Krishna every day. The deer and other forest animals saw him less often, but even they tasted the ecstasies of prema when they heard Krishna's flute. The birds frequenting the Vrindavan forest, who knew Krishna from the times he had rested beneath their trees, and even the birds who lived in lakes far away, had the divine intelligence to come nearby when Krishna played his flute. The unmoving creatures, trees, bushes, and vines, and even the non-living rivers also joined this festival of ecstasy, initiated by Krishna's flute song. And apart from all the beings present in Vraja on the surface of the earth, those who joined in that festival included even the clouds in the sky. Because the verses speak what he's saying. It's really, the poetry is just fantastic. The gopis are great poets, but they're it says in commentary, they're envisioning all these things. They've got like television. So he's out doing what he's doing, and they're absorbed in meditation, and they're seeing everything he's doing and feeling the feelings of the other living entities. It's a festival of ecstasy, but they're feeling, just as it says, both joy and sorrow. Joy because they're absorbed in thinking of Krishna, and sorrow because they're missing his physical presence or his, seeing him. So they're seeing him within, and that's seeing him. All details, every day. The 35 comes right after the rasa dance. So it's like he does the rasa dance, and then the next day he goes out, and they're absorbed like this. 149. The moving creatures become immobile. The inanimate become moved. The conscious beings lost consciousness, and the unconscious gained it. Constantly, indeed, these creatures and objects are submerged in a vast flood of prema rasa, overwhelmed by many transformations of ecstasy. Commentary. Animals, stunned by ecstasy, lost their power to move. Trees and other plants became mobile, trembling and erupting with new leaves. Conscious creatures no longer showed external expressions of life, and unconscious logs and stones appeared to come alive by sprouting leaves and rolling about in the wind. All these extraordinary phenomena were signs of the ecstasy evoked by the song of Krishna's flute. In the words of the gopis, again, it's chapter 21. So it's Krishna with the cowherd boys, going out. Dear friends, as Krishna and Balaram passed through the forest with their cowherd friends, leading their cows, they carry ropes to bind the cow's rear legs at the time of milking. When Lord Krishna plays on his flute, the sweet music causes the moving living entities to become stunned and the non-moving trees to tremble with ecstasy. These things are certainly very wonderful. So since that's a section, and the next section is the rasa dance, I'm going to stop here and we'll join Krishna's rasa dance tomorrow. Wow. And we're not even in Vrindavan yet. We're just meditating. It's very appropriate for us, like those who want to be with Krishna someday. This is what it tells us something about what we should be wanting and what it's like. That's what he's doing for Gopakumar, which means he's doing it for us. That's Sanatana Goswami. Sanatana Goswami ki jai. Brhad Bhagavatamrita ki jai.